Oh, this has been really the hot subject. Everybody says, Bernie, why haven't you talked about the $1 million stolen from the Tourist Development Council, what I always used to call the Turtle Development Council when I was on the radio? I have a crazy story that if you haven't heard it, I think you'll get a kick out of it. I'll share that with you as well. But as people are tuning in, I'll tell you that this tourism racket across everywhere, really, but in the state of Florida, everybody knows it's a racket. The Panama, well, the TDC has something like a $1.6 million a year budget just for salaries. The president of the TDC, Dan Rowe, he's making like almost $350,000 a year. And that doesn't even include all of the benefits, all the trips and the junkets. You always know when Dan Rowe's doing better because he has the nicest shoes in town. That's how I knew. That's how I knew he was doing well. You know, back in 2017, Visit Florida, the whole state tourism budget, we had a House Speaker in Florida by the name of Richard Corcoran, and he wanted to get rid of it. He knew it was what it was, pure cronyism, and but he wasn't able to succeed. I remember a lot of people were really nervous about it, but you may have seen or heard about Sheriff Tommy Ford had a big press conference. They arrested the vice president of administration. He was really like the CFO of Visit Panama City Beach, and that's like the convention and visitor center. It's the same thing. It falls under the TDC, the Tourist Development Council. That's the governing body. But I'm going to share with you some things that you tell me. You tell me if it ought to be done or not. But the guy they arrested, his name is Aaron Lee. And they say that over the course of a little more than a year, he had 1,000 transactions on the credit card. And remember, it's a nonprofit, okay? And they charged him with like 5 counts of, let's see, I wrote it down so I could get it right, with like 5 counts of fraudulent use of credit cards. So he had 1,000. They say he stole $1 million of taxpayer money, 1,000 transactions, and they charged him with 5 counts of fraudulent use of a credit card and grand theft, over $100,000. And at this big press conference, Sheriff Tommy Ford called him a con man and said he's been doing this scheme for a long time. And they got a tip. That's how they caught him. Oh, man. I got to tell you the whole story. And I want to ask you how this could have happened over the course of a little more than a year. Who's on the board of directors? Who's the treasurer? Should they have caught this before? Should they have known? Do they have checks and balances? Is the board doing its fiduciary duty? I'm going to tell you about it right after this. Don't let back pain and neck pain get you down. Find relief at Brown Chiropractic Center on St. Andrews Boulevard in Panama City. Dr. Sherry Brown helps people heal naturally with chiropractic adjustments and deep tissue massage. Call 769-3777.
Strong, effective leadership. 3 words that could mean the difference between prison and your freedom. I'm Al Saulene, your Panama City Beach lawyer. 850-215-0628.
So Aaron Lee was arrested on January 3rd. I think that was a Saturday. And there was a big press conference. And Sheriff Tommy Ford said they got a tip. Now, anytime, since my experience and what I've learned about the sheriff's office, anytime they say they got a tip, I'm immediately suspicious. Now, who tipped off the con man, as Sheriff Ford called him? Well, it was the president of the TDC, Dan Rowe. He tipped off the sheriff's office. And then they sent their crack investigator to arrest Aaron Lee. And as the news reported on WMBB, Aaron Lee he had a packed suitcase and evidently trying to leave town before his boss turned him in, is the story. And who was the crack investigator? Well, I'll actually show you who it was. It was this guy. The guy that was prowling around my backyard. Alvin Eiler. Alvin Eiler is the guy who arrested him. And if you don't know that story, Sheriff Tommy Ford got pissed off at me, and his top brass got pissed off at me in August of 2022, and essentially accused us of stealing somebody's AirPods. And surrounded our home, even creeped up to the window of Miss Sarah Moon's teenage boy. Just creeped around. It was just creeping around the backyard. But when they saw all the cameras, he ran out. He ran out of our private. So we've got a big lawsuit going on. But I just thought it was so interesting that the Pink Prancer was the one. There he is running out. He saw the cameras and he ran out of the backyard. That's Alvin Eiler. He's the one who made the arrest. I'll tell the story up front rather than about how I know Aaron Lee. And look, I'll get into the details of this crazy story of $1 million of taxpayer money being stolen in a minute. But first, how do I know Aaron Lee? Well, it was I got here in 2007 and started the radio show and did it for 8 years. It was a big show. It was syndicated throughout Florida. And the owner of the radio station was like a father figure to me, Don McCoy. And we had a good run. And I still love Don McCoy. I mean, nobody ever would have given me a chance to go. No one ever saw me until Don McCoy did. We met in California. We both went to USC in Los Angeles at different times. He went during the summer of love. I was born during the summer of love, So anyway, Don McCoy brings me here, puts me on the radio right when the boot camp case was going on. And we figured that out. And always around Don McCoy was Aaron Lee. Aaron Lee was like his consigliere. He was like his advisor, consultant, financial advisor when they were doing deals and stuff like that. So I was always with Don McCoy. We were always doing stuff together, and he would often have Aaron Lee around. So I knew Aaron Lee. Well, after 8 years on the radio, Don McCoy was catching a lot of heat at the yacht club in the Cove because I was telling you about Jay Trumbull. I was telling you about Governor Rick Scott, who signed a bill that allowed illegal aliens to become immigration attorneys. And I couldn't take it anymore. I used to get invited to the governor's mansion for dinner. I said, Bernie, why are you doing that, man? You get phone calls from Governor Rick Scott. Yeah, I don't want phone calls from somebody if he's going to do stuff like that. They did a whole bunch of stuff like that. So I didn't get invited to, that was the first thing. I didn't get invited to the governor's mansion anymore. Didn't get any more phone calls from Governor Rick Scott. And there were some other things that I was reporting. But Don McCoy, the owner of the radio station, said, Bernie, stop criticizing Republicans. And I said, okay, Don, I'll do my best. And I would get on the radio and I would light myself on fire and tell you everything. And boy, I'd get in trouble. I'd get in so much trouble. Don couldn't go to the yacht club without Jimmy Petronis and all of them saying, what the hell's going on with Bernie? And I said, Don, I'll do my best. But as you know, they were saying, get a hold of Bernie. Nobody gets a hold of me. So anyway, I did a show August 1st, 2014, and that was my last show on Talk Radio 101 because Don McCoy had to fire me. Well, he decided he had to fire me, but the general manager wouldn't do it. Melissa Allegretto refused. She left the building in tears. And so Don sent his consigliere in there, and Aaron Lee at just after 2:00 in the afternoon on a Thursday, August 1st, I believe it was a Thursday. He comes in and he tells me you're fired. So Aaron Lee's the guy who actually fired me. And they thought, all of the big shots in town who were tired of me telling you the truth, they thought, good, we're shut Bernie up. But what they didn't know is a few days later, I put this billboard up. I put that billboard up and started doing what I'm doing now, right? So anyway, that's the story. That's my story about Aaron Lee, and here he is. This is from his X feed, his Twitter account, and he's not active on it. He only has like 2 or 3 followers or something like that. And I don't think he's posted anything for several years, but anyway, that's and it says Vice President, Panama City Beach Convention and Visitors Bureau, TDC. So that's Aaron Lee. And so he was charged with stealing $1 million, 1,000 transactions from 2024 to 2026. And what was he buying? Well, I guess there were international cruises, overseas expenses. He even bought a horse. So on the board of directors, how do these things work? Oh, I wanted to tell you about too. So the tip comes from the president of the TDC, Dan Rowe. And he's at this big press conference that Sheriff Ford puts on. And also there is the chairman of the board of directors. And that's Claire Pease, Bay County Commissioner Claire Pease. She went up there and she said this will not be tolerated. Dan Rose said he was shocked to find fraudulent spending going on around here. Everybody walking around with new watches and fancy shoes and taking junkets overseas. They love taking overseas junkets, by the way. He couldn't believe it. He was up there incensed. Sheriff Ford said, thanks, this is my good buddy, Dan Rowe. And we're very grateful that he was the whistleblower. Now, that got me thinking about another whistleblower on April Fool's Day of 2019. Of course, I'm talking about Mayor Margo Anderson. And it's interesting how much different Sheriff Ford treated Dan Rowe. I suspect all of them have known about this for a long time, but that's just a suspicion and I can't prove it. So, but what I can tell you is not only did the Speaker of the House, Richard Corcoran in 2017, do his best to get rid of this tourism racket in the state of Florida, but do you remember in 2021, it was December of 2021, and there was a story that the finance director for Visit PCB, same nonprofit, the finance director was arrested and charged with embezzlement in 2021. And they all got up there and said, we've fixed everything now, nothing can go wrong. And then when Panama City Beach, a couple of years ago, when voters kicked Mayor Mark Moneymover Sheldon to the curb, and you remember a big issue that I told you about for 4 years was that the mayor, Moneymover Mark Sheldon, owned the music festivals. I mean, I'm thinking about, I could go in so many directions, but I'm going to stay focused. And he was getting more than $1 million a year for like a decade from the TDC to put on the music festivals, to market the music festivals. More than like, I mean, it had to be close to $15 million his company's got. And so I just thought that was a tremendous conflict of interest, which is another point. The members of, and so he got, Stuart Tetimer won. Remember all that? And as soon as Stuart Tetimer became the mayor on day one, a couple of the commissioners, they call them councilmen, a couple of the councilmen, they were deciding who's going to be, because 2 of them were going to be on this board. And the 2 are Mike Jarman and Ethan Register. They were on the board of directors. Now, the terms just expired. Here's something really interesting. At the beginning of this year, or at the end of 2025, a bunch of them, their terms expired. It was 3 days later or so. that this big thing happened after everybody was off the board. But all this stuff happened while they were on the board. So on the board of directors, you have officers, and then you have voting members. So you've got the president who gets a salary, and that's Dan Rowe. Dan Rowe, now I've talked to a lot of people in the know, and they tell me Dan Rowe's sweating more than Mark Furman at the Million Man March. Are you old enough to remember Mark Furman at the Million? Anyway, yeah, no, not too many people got that. But I'm just saying that Dan Rowe didn't know. He was shocked. And Sheriff Ford was very grateful that he tipped off the sheriff's office. And WMBB reported that the pink prancer here that was in my backyard and ran out when he saw the cameras. Jeez. They sent Alvin Eiler over there as quick as possible, and the crack investigator arrested him, and they solved the crime. They wrapped it up. Sheriff Ford said, "We got the con man." But a lot of people in town, they know that this for more than a year was going on right under their noses. It's really the responsibility of the board of directors. And the chairman of the board of directors is, let me show you. So this is Visit Panama City Beach, and it says that they offer visitors. They've got, I don't know how big their annual budget is. I should have looked, but they offer visitors a resource for current Panama City Beach information, and they get a boatload of money to do it. That guy right there makes nearly $350,000 a year. These local nonprofits, well, it's good work if you can get it, right? So they promote Panama City Beach, see, and they help new visitors to the area. And if you have questions, that's who you can call. It's a full service bureau. And they've got marketing and promotional materials, like a tremendous budget. They offer free program consultations, familiarization tours, and a pre-convention promotional materials, and assistance personnel at events, and much more, it says. So Dan Rowe is the president. He's on salary. The board members don't make a salary, but the Bay County Commissioner Claire Pease, she's the chairman. Reggie Johns has been the vice chair. Now, a lot of these, again, this year changed. A bunch of these people are off the board now. Yanni Petronis was the treasurer during this time. The treasurer during this time. And I'm trying to remember exactly what. Oh, yeah, this is what they said, by the way. I'll continue that in a second. Dan Rowe said, "Hey, Sheriff," at the beginning of the year. He said, "Hey, Sheriff," after everyone left. He said, "Sheriff, listen. There have been significant discrepancies. They got a tip. I don't know if they tracked him down with AirPods, but somehow Dan Rowe was able to find out significant discrepancies between the transactions on Aaron Lee's credit card. That's really the people's credit card, but it's really the nonprofit's credit card that's funded by the county. And again, the oversight board is the TDC, President Dan Rowe, and documented expenses. So the transactions and the documented expenses weren't adding up. Now, WMBB is actually doing some decent reporting on Aaron Lee. I think that WMBB is well aware that, how does somebody do this? 1,000 transactions, overseas expenses, international cruises, buying a horse, that kind of thing. Everybody knows, but WMBB is hitting this Aaron Lee pretty hard, and the board of directors, they had fair warning. There were people who were telling these board members, what are you doing hiring this guy? He did not have a good reputation, especially when it comes to this kind of stuff. And all of the board members knew it. But they brought him on anyway, gave him the credit card, looked the other way for more than a year. Do you think that the board members have any responsibility? So let's get back to who's on the board. So the treasurer, while this was happening, was Yanni Petronis, congressman related to Congressman Jimmy Petronis, who used to be the CFO of Florida. Now, people who know, this is not surprising. Just take a good look at that. And then the other members who were not officers of the board, but were voting board members include, and these guys have been on this, I think they've been on this board, some of these names, like 15 years. Andy Phillips. I mean, I've heard these names. I know they've been in this tourism. Well, they own hospitality businesses. Andy Phillips, it said on the website, has Inspire Vacation Properties, Gary Walsingham, the owner of Wonderworks, Mike Jarman, and Ethan Register. They fought like hell to get on this board a couple of years ago. I mean, they did not want Mayor Tedemer, the brand new guy, and Tedemer wanted to be on the board. And if he was on the board, this wouldn't have happened. Jeff DeBenedictis, Cadence Bank, and Jason Brooks, Hilton's son. These are the board members. But here's how nonprofits are supposed to work. I guess any business. But when it's not your money, you know. So what's the treasurer's role? What's the chairman's role? They just don't ask questions. They don't look. Now, WMBB is doing some reporting and saying that there was an audit done and turned into the state. There was something turned into the state, and there was a page that was not turned into the state. And the page, or pages, but I think it was a page that was not turned into the state by this nonprofit. Well, it flagged a whole bunch of problems. Yet this still continued. And so now, since nobody likes Aaron Lee, he's the fall guy. Now, I'll tell you, this does give me the same feeling that I had when Michael Johnson went down. I know you probably don't know Michael Johnson, but he was the HUD director for Panama City. He was also doing stuff for the county. And in 2021, I started reporting hard on that criminal. I mean, and everybody knew it. The attorneys knew, the attorneys were in on it. Even the city manager was in on it. They were doing fake bids. Commissioner Tommy Ham, who moonlighted as a commissioner, but really was a brand new home builder. Well, he's a home builder. He'd been a home builder, but now he was successful. And he was getting these big developments, these big deals from fraudulent bids that didn't even take place. And I was giving details of this and reporting. I was giving it to a member of the commission, Panama City, and I was giving details. And evidently, when he got arrested, Michael Johnson, and charged with embezzling like $470,000 from a children's nonprofit that operates inside City Hall. It's called something like Friends of After School Assistance. And he had been the treasurer, Michael Johnson, there for a long time. That's another practice, by the way. Good business practice with nonprofits is not to have board members for a decade, not to have the same treasurer with nobody looking for a decade. But Michael Johnson was convicted, or he actually pled guilty and received a lighter sentence from his fellow board member, Larry Bassford. And the sheriff's office said we weren't involved in that because Sheriff Ford was the treasurer of a different kids nonprofit that Michael Johnson was the president of at the same time, called the Children's Advocacy Center. So in 2020, just before all this went down, Michael Johnson, who was involved in all this stuff I was reporting on, oh man. Well, I didn't even know back then really much about Big Bend or the Children's Advocacy Center or any of those things. I didn't know Sheriff Ford was the treasurer. I didn't know that they were taking big donations from their top target of public corruption, Derwin White, at the Children's Advocacy Center, where Michael Johnson was the president and Sheriff Ford was the treasurer and Larry Bassford was on the board. I didn't know they were they were taking big donations from their other big target, Ashbrit, the National Hurricane Debris Company. In 2020, while Sheriff Ford was the president, was the treasurer, and Michael Johnson was the president, they took in $625,000 from Ashbrit, who they were investigating for FEMA fraud. Took $625,000 from Ashbrit, and on the very same day awarded it to JC Contractors, Derwin White, while they were the top targets of the sheriff's and the FBI's FEMA public corruption investigation. But when Michael Johnson was popped, and he was the treasurer of that other nonprofit that's hidden inside Panama City Hall, they said, Bassford and Ford, well, yeah, it was a real bad thing he did with that kid's nonprofit. Good thing he's clean as a whistle at ours. So the Gulf Coast Children's Advocacy Center, there was no investigation into what he was doing there. And this feels a lot like that to me. But Dan Rose so far has the connections and the complexion to get the protection. If I start rhyming, this is going to be a barn burner tonight. I'm actually almost done, but Dan Rose still has protection and, or at least good friends, and hell, maybe he just doesn't know anything about what's going on. But shouldn't the treasurer know? It's amazing, isn't it? So Michael Johnson was the fall guy for that. Nobody else even was looked at. And here, Aaron Lee's the fall guy. And I believe both of them, I mean, ever since what happened to James Finch and Margot Anderson and the way I was lied to, I don't jump to conclusions about people's guilt anymore. But, I suspect that, if they did it, they'll be convicted, and they should be. But it just feels to me, and everybody's buzzing around town in those circles, and they're all saying, can you believe this? Like, everybody knows, like, this should not have happened. There should be accountability across that board. And Dan Rose sweating bullets. Dan Rowe, I think, is jumping every time the phone rings right now. And I have a prediction. Here's a prediction. I'm not very good at these, by the way, but what the hell? I never let not being very good at something stop me, ever. That's true, by the way. What do you mean you know? We know, Bernie. Anyway, here's my prediction. Dan Rowe's going to step down. And, not because he committed any crimes, of course, but there's got to be some accountability. And that's my prediction, is that Dan Rowe will be forced to resign. And I predict that nobody else will be held accountable. After all, they've got the former CFO of Florida, Jimmy Petronas, who's related to the treasurer during all this, Yanni Petronis. And I know that the Justice Department, at least in December of 2024, had no interest. They had great interest. They had great interest in not bringing charges, prosecuting anybody in Congress or anybody related to anybody in Congress. I know that. So, yeah, my prediction is that could this be the end of RICO? I don't know if it's going to be the end of RICO or not, but do you know what that's from? How does it go? Oh, what's that line? Mother of mercy. That's it. Mother of mercy. Is this the end of RICO? Who knows what that is? If you know what that is, put it in the chat. I'll be so impressed. Mother of mercy. Is this the end of RICO? I doubt it. But I do think it's probably, Dan Rowe's probably going to be squeezed out. People are nervous. But, we'll see. Anyway, that's all I got. I think, yeah. I think I've shown you. Oh no, I do have questions that are unanswered, and I'm glad I just thought of that. Let's see, is that it? I do. I do have some questions. Glad I remembered this. Right before I have several questions that should be asked, and they should be asked now. And if they're here's a couple of things. And this is important. I suspect, but I don't know, that Aaron Lee is the fall guy. I also suspect he did it. But I also suspected Margot and James did it. And I found out they didn't. But I suspect he did it. And if he is the fall guy, if he knows that there's real corruption in the TDC and visit PCB, then wouldn't he roll on everybody? I mean, wouldn't he spill the beans? Wouldn't he sing? So if he doesn't, and I think that's where the pressure is right now. I think that's why everybody's nervous right now. Because in these types of organizations, people know. And nobody gets popped unless what I've learned about Sheriff Ford, and I hate this, is that sometimes he'll do the right thing, but for the wrong reasons. And this feels like that to me as well, that he did the right thing and arrested somebody for stealing $1 million of taxpayer money. But I would bet you it's for the wrong reasons. I'll bet you there's more to this story that I don't know about. But I know people are nervous right now. And so if Aaron Lee does not roll and doesn't sing, then that would signal that the TDC is cleaner than I think it is. If he does, then my suspicions will be stronger. So I'm watching that. All right, I'm watching that. But meanwhile, let me show you these very important questions that ought to be asked now about all this. And right before I show you that, can I just thank a couple sponsors? As always, I want to thank the Unknown Patriot for your support. And I want to thank those of you who throw a tip in the tip jar, because this is crowdfunded. This is, I don't have a whole lot of sponsors, so I do appreciate you so much for doing that. As little as $5 a month. And there's a bunch of you who do it at patreon.com/Bernie Thompson. Patreon.com/Bernie Thompson. It's easy, it's anonymous, and you can quit at any time. All right, let's go back and take a look at these questions. And please, if there are questions, and I'm not that good at this. I'm not that good at, I'm terrible at business, okay? So if you're good at business and you see other questions that need to be asked about the situation, please add them in the comments. Okay, here we go. Tell me if you agree. So the first major question is how do you get to nearly $1.1 million without nobody knowing, without anybody knowing? I mean, what were the monthly controls, statement review, reconciliations, spending caps? Because the board normally gives people with credit cards a spending cap. At least a responsible board that's doing its fiduciary duty, its legal duty. Category blocks and exception reports. How did they get to $1 million over more than a year, Mike Jarman, Ethan Register, Yanni Petronas, Claire Pease, and the rest of you? How does that happen? Well, Bernie is real sneaky and we're real busy. Okay. Number 2, who had the duty to spot anomalies and when? Out of everybody on the board, who do you think would be most responsible for that? The treasurer? That's my guess. The chairman? Number 3, was there independent oversight or insider oversight? Because we know that the red flags that were tagged never made it to the state. Who did that? Who kept that from going to the state? Is all of this going to be Aaron Lee? Or were there others? Number 4, were there conflicts of interest in the oversight structure? I think there are tremendous conflicts of interest by the very structure of the TDC. There have got to be structural changes, and they said that at the press conference, at the sheriff's press conference. We're going to do everything we can to make sure this never happens again. It's always never happens again. We got to make sure it never happens again. So, timing, transparency, those were the questions. You saw those. I know there are more. Have you been following the story? I've been following it a little bit, but I'll tell you this. We, the brains behind the outfit and we've been calling audit. Do this. Trust me on this. Please trust me on this. Go to X, if you have an X account, Twitter X, and search. Go to the search bar and search hashtag audit the TDC. Hashtag audit the TDC. And you will see what Miss Sarah Moon was tweeting and the questions being asked as far back as 2017, really as far back as 2015, when Mark Sheldon got to town and got more than $1 million in seed money for the music festivals that continued being planted for still. It's a racket. I said it then. I still say it. But, then these things happen. But, yeah, go to x.com. You're going to enjoy it. I wish she was still active and doing that kind of stuff because she was she was giving them hell. Hashtag audit the TDC. Search that on x.com and see what you see. All right, I will look at your comments a little bit later. And all right, hey, if you haven't done this yet, it's free. And every weekend, at the end, once a week, I send out the email newsletter that includes all the shows. You don't even need to have Facebook to see them, and the important posts all in one email. It's the email newsletter, and it's free. And it takes about 20 seconds to put your email in there, and it will hit your inbox once a week. Bernie.substack.com. It's very important. It is to me. All of you who have free subscriptions, paid subscriptions, you get the behind the scenes stuff as well. And boy, does it ever help. All right. I guess I should show you this too. I hate doing all this at once, but if you've been wanting to get my attention and haven't been successful, this is a surefire way to do it. You can go to calendly.com/Bernie Thompson and you can book a call, 30 minutes or an hour, and you will have my full attention. If there's a tip you want to tell me about, if you want to talk about, hey, how do you set up podcasting? If you want to talk about what gear do you take out in the woods, doesn't matter. Calendly.com/Bernie Thompson. It's super easy, and it also helps me to continue to do this. But that's a great, I mean, everybody who's done that, it's been very good. And I mean, it's a bunch of good people too that I stay in touch with. All right, that's it. I'm going to get out of here. Thank you for being with me, and I will see you very soon.